Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany, ruled by Adolf Hitler from 1933 to 1945, was one of the most dangerous and oppressive regimes in modern history, where being born meant growing up under a brutal dictatorship with almost no personal freedom. The government controlled every part of life, and dissent was met with violence. People who spoke out against the Nazis or even made harmless jokes about Hitler could be arrested, tortured, or executed. The regime was responsible for the Holocaust, a state-sponsored genocide that led to the murder of over 6 million Jews and millions of others, including Roma people, disabled individuals, political opponents, and anyone considered undesirable. Children were forced into Nazi youth programs where they were brainwashed with racist, violent ideologies and trained to idolize Hitler while being taught to hate Jews and other minorities. The Nazis turned Germany into a war machine, launching World War II in 1939, which resulted in constant bombings, starvation, military drafts, and mass civilian deaths across Europe. Racism was a legal and enforced part of life, with laws such as the Nuremberg Laws stripping Jewish citizens of rights and marking them for removal from society. Privacy didn't exist. The Gestapo, Nazi secret police, monitored people in their homes, workplaces, and even through neighbors willing to inform on each other. Women had limited roles and were encouraged to stay home, raise children, and support Nazi ideals, while careers, independence, or education were discouraged or forbidden. The Nazis also carried out a secretive euthanasia program where tens of thousands of disabled people were murdered because they were seen as a burden on society. Intellectual freedom was destroyed, as books, art, and scientific ideas that didn't align with Nazi beliefs were banned or burned. Even religious groups like Jehovah's Witnesses were persecuted and sent to camps for refusing to follow Nazi orders. Trying to escape the country was nearly impossible and highly dangerous, as borders were heavily monitored and punishment was severe. Propaganda was used daily to control how people thought, what they read, and what they believed, even if it was entirely false. Germany's military aggression devastated other countries including Poland, France, and the Soviet Union, leaving cities in ruins and millions dead. And by the end of the regime in 1945, Nazi Germany had caused catastrophic suffering on a global scale, leaving behind a legacy of horror, destruction, and lessons that still matter today. Khmer Rouge. Khmer Rouge was a brutal communist regime that took control of Cambodia from 1975 to 1979. Led by Pol Pot and his followers who believed they could create a perfect classless society by wiping out everything connected to modern life, education, and individual freedom. In just 4 years, nearly 2 million Cambodians died, almost a quarter of the population through mass executions, starvation, disease, and exhaustion. The regime shut down all schools and hospitals, banned religion, destroyed infrastructure, and forced millions of people out of cities into rural labor camps. Anyone who appeared educated, including teachers, doctors, or even those wearing glasses, were often labeled enemies of the state and executed. Children were taken from their parents and placed into brainwashing programs to turn them into loyal soldiers or spies, sometimes even forced to report or kill their own families. All forms of personal expression, including music, art, and religion, were banned, with monks murdered and temples destroyed as Buddhism was outlawed. There were no trials or justice systems. Any suspicion could lead to torture or immediate death. People worked up to 16 hours a day in extreme conditions with barely any food, surviving on watery rice porridge while diseases spread unchecked because medical care was non-existent. Torture centers like Tuo Sleng became symbols of cruelty, where prisoners were forced to confess to crimes they didn't commit before being executed. The regime's complete control stripped people of their identities, freedom, and basic humanity, reducing them to tools of the state. Survivors were left traumatized, and many still live with the psychological scars and physical effects of those years. Today, Cambodia continues to grapple with the legacy of the Khmer Rouge through memorials, war crimes tribunals, and education, but the damage done to an entire generation cannot be undone. Being born in Cambodia during the Khmer Rouge era meant being born into one of the most dangerous and dehumanizing periods in modern history, where life was considered cheap and almost anything could get you killed. The Belgian Congo. The Belgian Congo was a Central African colony controlled by Belgium from 1885 to 1960, and it became infamous for being one of the most brutal colonial regimes in history, especially under King Leopold II, who personally ruled the territory as his private property for over 2 decades, during which an estimated 10 million Congolese people died from starvation, disease, forced labor, and widespread violence. with one of the most horrific punishments being the routine cutting off of hands when rubber quotas weren't met, including those of children or relatives as a form of collective punishment, as entire villages were terrorized into extracting rubber and ivory under inhumane conditions, while families were torn apart, children enslaved, and women taken hostage to control the male population. And despite Congo's rich natural resources like rubber, copper, gold, and diamonds, almost all wealth was stolen and shipped to Belgium, while native Congolese were denied education, land rights, and political power, treated instead as a labor force to exploit, and their cultural identities were actively suppressed through forced religious conversion, colonial propaganda, and violent punishment for any resistance. And even after international pressure forced Belgium to take over official control in 1908, little changed for the better, as racism, corruption, and exploitation remained the core of the colonial system. And when Congo finally gained independence in 1960, it was left in chaos with no proper institutions, leading to years of civil unrest, foreign interference, and dictatorship, including the rise of Mobutu Sese Seko, who ruled from 1965 to 1997, looted the country's wealth, and drove it deeper into poverty. And in the decades that followed, Congo became the center of some of the world's deadliest modern conflicts, with wars in the east causing millions of deaths and displacements, widespread sexual violence, and ongoing instability fueled by competition over minerals like coltan and cobalt used in modern electronics. And today, many Congolese children are still forced to work in dangerous mines while the country suffers from poverty, weak infrastructure, and poor access to healthcare or education, making being born here especially hard due to the long-lasting effects of colonialism, war, and systemic exploitation that continue to shape life for millions of people in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. North Korea. North Korea is one of the most isolated and controlled countries in the world, and being born there comes with severe hardships and restrictions. The government tightly controls every aspect of life, including what people can say, where they can live, and what jobs they can have. From birth, individuals are assigned a social status called songbun, based on their family's loyalty to the regime, which determines their access to education, healthcare, and employment opportunities. There is no freedom to leave the country. Attempting to escape is punishable by harsh prison sentences, forced labor camps, or even execution. The government strictly limits access to outside information, providing only a censored version of the internet, and spreading intense propaganda that teaches unconditional loyalty to the ruling family. People live in constant fear of surveillance by secret police, and neighbors trained to report any sign of dissent, meaning even private conversations can lead to punishment. Entire families can be punished if one member is accused of breaking the law, which includes minor offenses like watching foreign films or listening to banned music. Starvation and malnutrition are common due to chronic food shortages, especially outside the capital. Education focuses almost entirely on government-approved ideology and military training, leaving citizens with limited knowledge of the wider world. Religion is banned, except for a few state-controlled groups, and practicing faiths like Christianity can lead to imprisonment or worse. Citizens do not choose their careers. Jobs are assigned by the state without regard for personal skills or preferences. Elections exist only on paper, with no real choice or secret ballots, and voting against government candidates can have serious consequences. Healthcare facilities are poorly equipped, lacking basic medicines, electricity, and clean water, making access to proper medical treatment nearly impossible for most people. These conditions combine to create a harsh, oppressive environment that severely limits freedom, opportunity, and safety for anyone born in North Korea. Stalin's Soviet Union. Stalin's Soviet Union was ruled by Joseph Stalin from the mid-1920s until his death in 1953. The Soviet Union became one of the harshest and most oppressive regimes in modern history, making life extremely difficult and often dangerous for anyone born there. Stalin established total control over nearly every aspect of life. The government dictated where people lived, what jobs they had, what they were allowed to say, and even what they could think. Freedom of speech was non-existent, and criticizing Stalin or the state in any way could lead to arrest, torture, or execution. The secret police NKVD created a constant atmosphere of fear, with citizens encouraged to spy on each other, and even children taught to report their parents. Millions of people were sent to brutal forced labor camps known as gulags, often for vague or false charges, and were subjected to starvation, freezing temperatures, and backbreaking work. Stalin's agricultural policies caused catastrophic famines, especially in Ukraine during the Holodomor 1932 to 1933, where millions died from hunger while food was seized and exported. Mass arrests and purges became common, where innocent people, including government officials and military leaders, were put through fake trials and executed. Elections were meaningless, with only one candidate allowed, and outcomes always in Stalin's favor. Strict censorship was enforced on books, films, and newspapers, all of which praised Stalin and hid the truth. History was regularly rewritten to suit Stalin's narrative, including removing former allies from official records and photos. Religion was banned, with churches closed and worship treated as a crime. Children were raised in schools that glorified Stalin and promoted loyalty to the state over family. Most families lived in overcrowded apartments with little privacy or basic comforts. During World War II, Stalin's leadership resulted in massive military and civilian casualties due to poor planning and brutal tactics. Even being born into the wrong family, such as one labeled enemy of the people, meant you were denied opportunities for education or employment. Finally, citizens were trapped inside the Soviet Union, as leaving the country was illegal, and attempting to escape could lead to being killed or imprisoned. These factors combined to create a country where fear, control, and suffering defined daily life for millions under Stalin's rule. Maoist China. Maoist China, ruled by Mao Zedong from 1949 to 1976, was one of the harshest periods in modern history, marked by extreme government control, mass death, and widespread suffering. Being born in this era meant living under a dictatorship where free speech did not exist. Any criticism of the Communist Party or Mao himself could lead to imprisonment, torture, or execution. During the Great Leap Forward 1958 to 1962, a disastrous economic policy aimed at rapidly industrializing China, millions of people died. Estimates range from 30 to 45 million, mostly from starvation due to fake production reports and forced grain seizures. Families had no right to own land or property. Everything belonged to the state. Jobs were assigned by the government, not based on ability but on political loyalty. Under the Cultural Revolution, 1966 to 1976, chaos reigned as students formed violent Red Guard groups that attacked teachers, intellectuals, and even their own families. Education collapsed, books were burned, schools shut down, and anyone with knowledge or a non-communist background was targeted as an enemy of the people. If your family had ties to business, religion, or landowning before the revolution, you could be publicly humiliated, beaten, or worse, simply for your bloodline. The state monitored citizens constantly, encouraging people to report on each other. Travel was restricted, and people needed permits just to move to another town. Disappearances were common, with countless individuals sent to brutal labor camps without trial. In rural areas, famine, disease, and poverty were devastating, especially as trained doctors were replaced with minimally trained barefoot doctors. Meanwhile, Mao's image was everywhere, on walls, in homes, and in daily rituals, and citizens were expected to worship him as infallible. Failure to show enough devotion was dangerous. Entire communities were punished for minor mistakes or perceived disloyalty. Even accurate reporting was suppressed, as local officials lied to avoid punishment, which made food shortages even worse. Anyone born in Maoist China faced constant fear, limited opportunities, and severe hardship. This period left deep scars that shaped China's development for decades. The Aztec Empire. The Aztec Empire, which ruled central Mexico from the 1300s to the early 1500s, was one of the most powerful and organized civilizations in the Americas. But being born into it often meant facing an extremely harsh life, filled with fear, violence, and limited freedom. The society was built on a rigid class system, where your birth determined your role, rights, and future. If you were born into a poor family or as a slave, there was little chance of escape. Children were expected to follow strict discipline, and punishments for misbehavior could include beatings or even being forced to breathe in chili smoke. Education was mandatory, but harsh. Boys were trained to become warriors, and girls were taught to be obedient wives and mothers with few other options. Religion ruled everything, and human sacrifice was a constant part of life. The Aztecs believed they had to offer human hearts to the gods to keep the sun rising and the world alive, so thousands of people, often prisoners, but sometimes even citizens or children, were killed in elaborate rituals. War was non-stop, driven partly by the need to capture new victims for sacrifice. Disease was also a major threat, especially after the arrival of Europeans introduced smallpox and other illnesses that wiped out much of the population. Women faced severe risks in childbirth, which was considered as dangerous as going to battle, and dying during labor was seen as a heroic death. Slavery was common, and people could be sold or forced into it due to debt or punishment. There was no freedom of religion, and the fear of angering the gods controlled daily life. Even family life was under pressure from high taxes and expectations to contribute goods or services to the empire. The empire was a complex and highly developed society. But for the average person, life was full of danger, control, and little personal choice. While the Aztecs achieved incredible feats in engineering, agriculture, and city building, daily life for most people, especially those not in the elite class, was defined by survival, obedience, and fear of punishment or death. Ancient Sparta. Ancient Sparta was a powerful city-state in Greece, known for its military culture and harsh way of life, making being born there very difficult. From birth, Spartan babies were examined by elders, and those judged weak or unhealthy were abandoned to die, showing the extreme value placed on strength. At age 7, boys were taken from their families to join the Agoja, a brutal state-run training system focused entirely on war skills, endurance, and discipline. Physical punishment was common in this training, meant to toughen the boys and teach them to hide pain and weakness. They were also taught to steal food to survive, but were punished if caught, encouraging stealth and cunning. Education in Sparta ignored arts and literature, focusing solely on preparing boys for a life of warfare and obedience. Spartan men trained constantly and lived under strict military discipline, always ready for battle, with little personal freedom. Women in Sparta had more rights than in other Greek states, including owning land, but were also expected to be physically strong and produce healthy children to maintain the warrior population. Marriages were arranged without romance, and personal emotions were discouraged. Spartans were not allowed to leave the city without permission, limiting their exposure to outside ideas and maintaining control over citizens. Wealth was downplayed, with simple living enforced even among the rich, as luxury was seen as shameful. The Spartan economy depended on a large population of helots, enslaved people who farmed the land, and constant fear of rebellion led to harsh control and violence. Men were not allowed to live at home with their families until they were 30, and remained in military service or reserve until age 60, showing how their entire life was tied to Sparta's military needs. Death in battle was glorified, while cowardice was punished with lifelong disgrace. This strict, war-focused lifestyle made being born Spartan harsh and unforgiving, demanding physical and mental toughness above all else. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button. Subscribe for more awesome content, and turn on the bell so you never miss an upload. If you have any video ideas, please let me know in the comment section. Have a great rest of your day.